Alright, so I'm going to show you guys now Adobe Animate, which is obviously part of the Adobe suite. This is a whole course in and of itself, this program, maybe a couple. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a quick overview of it on this one, and then I'm going to show you two different ways to basically animate in two different videos. Okay, so Animate. Animate was basically, it used to be called Adobe Flash. The big difference is this. If I exit out of this and don't save it. Now, instead of creating Flash documents, which it still can do, it still can create, what do you call it, Swift files. But I'm sure you guys have been on your phones, maybe not these days, but you say, oh, can't open content specifically, especially if you used a Apple phone. They basically stopped supporting it, as well as many web browsers, so like Google and Chrome and Firefox and the like. Because basically there's just some security issues with Flash, because it uses a certain the action script here creates a leak for potential viruses and things like that to penetrate your computer and what have you. So what they've decided to do is they renamed it, because that's what companies always do, and then, which I hate the name, because there used to be Adobe Edge Animate, and there's there's an animation plugin now for After Effects, and so Animate is such a generic name, it's really hard to kind of tell what they mean by that. But anyways, they renamed it, and then now it will actually create an HTML5 canvas, which basically means instead of exporting out Swift files or Flash content, it actually will export out HTML5, which is what the standard language of the web is, as well as CSS and JavaScript. So basically, the way it works is that it's hypertext markup language. The content is HTML5, so your words, your pictures, things like that, your video, your audio, those are through HTML5. CSS is the design element, so it allows you to put to change the colors of the text, to change the size, to put shadows, a limited amount of animation, background colors, and things like that. And then JavaScript basically allows you to add interactive content, so you can make more than buttons, but buttons and games and calculators and things that create basically functional code. Well, we've been using JavaScript actually it's UniScript in Unity, but it's an offshoot of JavaScript. Anywho, so that's the big difference with this in comparison to some of the others. Right in the beginning, you can just do HTML5 canvas. We're not going to actually export out anything in HTML5, but in the future, if you wanted to create web content, like you want to make your own web page, it is potentially possible to use Animate. We're actually just going to use it for animation purposes, but there you go. Okay, so right off the bat, I got this thing here, and what I'm going to do is go to my select tool up here, and I am going to change the size of this and the frame rate. So right now the frame rate is 24 frames per second, which is generally what I like to use. I'm actually going to switch this to 15 frames. The reason being is that video, or when you look on your screen, you're running at 30 frames per second. Okay, now video on a TV is 29.97 because of a lossy film loss frame thing, but and most of the time when you play video games, you want them to run at 60 frames per second because that's considered silky smooth. But I don't need 30 frames per second. That's just a lot. So I'll just do 15, and then I can just do every 4 frames if I want to run 60 frames, or do every 2 frames if I want to run at 30. So I'm just going to go 15 FPS. Then my size kind of depends on what I want this to be when I bring it in. So right now let's just do 500 by 500. 500. Tab 500. Okay, so now I have just a square here, and that works pretty well, and that's good. Okay, so that's all I really needed for now. So you have this direct selection tool and sub-selection tool, right? So your regular select and the sub-selection. So basically the way it works is that you can draw like a shape, okay, and then if I use this, I can grab the points herein, okay. And if these, for some reason, were of a different sort, like let's say it was curved, this tool allows me to grab the Bezier handles, okay? So that's what that tool does. However, honestly, I never really used this in here because the selection tool here, when you hover over, you can actually grab. See how it turns into an arc? Lets me grab, and it also lets me grab the points. So in a weird way, you don't really need this unless you specifically want to control these Bezier handles. Most of the time I just use this because I just find it's a little bit easier and smoother, and then you can just grab these points and such, and it's nice. Okay. I can also grab the inside here and delete it, or I can grab the stroke. Right now it's black on black, but I can grab the stroke and get rid of that. Okay, so double click. All right, so that's the selection tool. That's basically your main way of selecting things, just like in Photoshop, and this is direct selection, like Illustrator or Photoshop if you ever use the pen tools, basically. Okay, so Animate here is a vector drawing piece of software. Okay, so let me draw another shape here. Let me change the fill to something a little better to look at. There we go. Okay. So this is basically just a transform tool. It allows you to, let's grab the whole thing, allows me to transform this. Okay. I don't really find it, honestly, all that useful. If I hold Control, you can see you can select specific areas of this. All right. Like it'll let you freely, because otherwise it just scales, but if I hold Control, it'll let me freely grab each one of these points. Gradient trend, we don't care about that. Okay, so that's what that does. Nothing too fancy. Just gonna hit enter or whatever. All right, the pen tool works like the pen tool that you would expect in others. I'm just gonna double click to select the whole thing. Basically, if I click, 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 and then I go to the end and turns a little circle, that will make a complete shape, and that's what it does. I can even, it's not giving me the option to fill it. And there you go. All right. So, but if I instead do click, drag, click, drag, click, drag, or I can click still too and drag, use both. I can specifically draw with my pen tool here. Okay. So it's just another way of drawing. Most of the time you guys are not going to find this that useful. After you draw something, if you have the pen tool on though, if I hover over an area, you can see that I can, why is it not giving me the minus? That's weird. So I can go to my delete anchor tool and I can delete points if I decide I don't need them. Generally speaking, you want to have as few as possible when you draw a shape. I can also, if I hover over an area, see how it turns into a plus? That will add a point. Okay? And if you go over one, and then if I have a point here, I can actually click and drag on it to manipulate it. All right? That's what this convert one is. So I can take this guy and go like this. And you can see, or I can click on it and it will make it straight, or if I click and drag, it'll make it round. All right, so that's this. So basically, those are all subtools of this. Okay. T is your type tool. I'm not going to really go over it. I think you can figure it out. Okay, it's not really anything too fancy. The line tool draws a line. Not really that great. If you use it in combination with this tool, you know, it works pretty well. Okay, but basically it draws a line. This draws a square. It's a rectangle primitive tool. Basically, it automatically makes it into an object. I'll talk about that later, but for the most part, don't worry about that right now. Just know that it draws a rectangle. This one draws an oval, and this one will draw a polystar. So you should be able to choose, let me see, maybe it's under options. You can choose the number of sides that you want it to be. So right now, apparently it's 5, so it's going to draw me a pentagon. Okay? But that's what this does. All right, let me just select this whole thing here and delete it. So next down the line here is the pencil tool. Basically, the pencil tool, instead of having to draw it manually like we did with the pen tool, you can just click and drag, and it will try to figure out the points that you need. So it still is a vector. You can see all the points. The problem is, see how many points there are? That's a ton. That's a lot of points. And when you go to animate and stuff, it makes it a little bit more cumbersome to manipulate. And it's more information. It bogs it down. So generally speaking, I don't really use this. But if you do have it, you know, you can change the size of the stroke here, right? So it's really large, but you'll see that it still is using the same, come here. It still is using the same system. It's still a series of points. It's just the size of the stroke, which is the line, and then the width of it. That's your stroke, as opposed to something like this. So you can see I changed my stroke there, but this is the stroke, this is the fill. All right. Boom. All right, so that's the pencil tool. Now, the paintbrush tool is a little bit different. This actually doesn't create a line, it creates a shape as you draw. So if you watch, oh, wait, sorry, this is not what I thought it was. This is the paintbrush tool. I never use that. We'll skip that one. This one's the one I was talking about, the normal brush tool. When I draw, it draws like that, okay? Which doesn't look like much. It looks like it's the same. But if you watch, I can go down here, make sure I have my pressure sensitivity on. I'm going to change my brush size, which I can do manually here. Or you can use your bracket keys, which are to the right of the P key, up, and you can actually see it. See how it's, watch, if I push, keep going up, see how it's getting bigger? Okay? What this does is that based on pressure sensitivity, it'll change the thickness of the line. Now, the difference between this and the other is this. If you look, it's actually a shape. There's points on either side. Okay? Which is necessary in order to have the stroke. Come on, man. In order to have the, so you see it's actually a shape that you're drawing, and it uses the pressure sensitivity of your brush in order to determine how thick that shape is. This is a little bit harder to manipulate as well, but you get that nice strokey line. So most of the time I use the brush and not the pencil, because the pencil is always linear. It feels flat to me. Let's make this thinner. But there's no pressure sensitivity. It just is literally what it is. So depending on the look you're looking for, this might work, but most of the time I like to use the paintbrush. You see how this has a nicer organic feel to it, as opposed to this, okay, which there is no thickness. But like I said, the one's more cumbersome to work with than the other. Boom, boom, boom. The bone tool we're not going to use. Basically, it allows you to put an understructure underneath your character and allows you to move them. The fill tool is like what you think. So let's say I draw a circle here. I can use my fill tool and make the color, I don't know, blue. Fills it in blue. Okay, so it's not anything too special. The outline tool is basically the same idea, but it lets me change the outline. Okay, so it'll change the outline color. So basically, one does the fill, one does the stroke. Eyedropper tool, you know what that is. It just selects the color. Eraser is obvious. It erases. Okay, what's this one? Width tool. I never play with that. Hand tool is just your usual. Lets you move it around, but I mean you can literally just hold space bar, so you don't need to ever use that. Zoom tool, just use Control plus and minus. You don't really need to use that, but there's the zoom tool. This represents your stroke color. This represents your fill color. You can toggle them with this. I don't know if X works in here. Let's see. Nope, doesn't work. Okay. This is object drawing. So basically the way it works is like this. This program's a little bit different in that, watch, if I draw a shape, okay, and then let's say I draw another shape. I'm just going to change the colors here. Wow, I literally picked the same color. And I draw another shape. What will happen is that the one will actually cut into the other. See? Now that is no longer part of it. Because these are always able to take pieces off. They're just like, you can cut into them, you can do whatever, all right? The problem is that eventually if you put it over here and then you're like, oh wait, I want that back. If I take this off, it cuts into it. You see what I'm saying? So it's kind of a weird way of working. I personally like it. I find it interesting. But it's a little bit different than other vectors. If you're used to a normal vector, the way it works is that every time you do a drawing, it will, or you make a shape, it's like an object. Like you can't cut into it. So for instance, let's say I turn on this mode here. Let's turn this back on. I turn on this mode. Every time I draw, this is automatically a shape. So let's say I draw another one here. And that's with that object mode, just so you can see, that's with this on. That's the same thing as doing this, the rectangle primitive tool. That's basically the same idea. So you never actually need even to use that. Now when I go to grab this, you see it doesn't affect it. This is, all right. And if I want to change this, I can double click on it and it's like a sub object. Now I can manipulate it in here and do whatever I want, okay? And then I'll just, click up here, so you see you're in the drawing object, and click back to scene 1, and now I'm back outside. All right, and I can go to this one, and I can double click, and you see it's basically like it's a sub object, and then I can manipulate this any way I want, and I'll just click back on this to back up. But this is still a separate object, but they're not going to cut into each other. Okay. All right, okay, so that's a rough overview of all the tools. Hopefully that's enough to kind of get the idea across. And I'm basically going to show you two ways to animate. I'm going to show you how to just kind of draw like frame by frame animation. And then I'm also going to show you how to basically do it through objects. So you can animate an object moving. You might find one works better for you than the other. The one where you move the objects is a little less drawing, but it might look a little more mechanical. So there you go. There's a really rough overview.